Welcome back to my series on the Osireion, this wonderful megalithic site. This is part 4, and we're just finishing off looking at the big players of the independent researchers in the field of ancient sites. Now let's have a look at the land of Chem. This is a channel that I'm actually quite excited about, because some of the episodes seem to be completely on point and a lot of the information is correct and in alignment with what I have seen in my dream regressions. There are some differences. There are things that he talks about which are different, but the majority of the stuff, he's pretty much onto it. So he talks a lot about the chemical production systems, but in addition to that, there were a lot of places that were purely used for experimentation purposes, and I think that that is one of the key aspects that still needs to be explored. But anyway, he's come up with quite an interesting theory for the Osireion, and I think he's partially correct in that I think that what he describes is the way that the dynastic Egyptians used this site once they discovered it. But I don't think that it was the original purpose for this site. But there are a lot of places in Egypt which were used for one thing and then later used for something else. The Great Pyramid being the perfect example, because it was originally for the creation of power, and then later when all the interesting bits were removed and Tehut was trying to rebuild the place, it was then used as a place of healing, because the way that it was built with the resonance and the healing properties of the building was very useful for other purposes. And then, of course, later on it was used for other things. But I deviate, as I quite often do. So let's get on to what the land of Chem has got to say on this subject.
The function of this structure in later episodes, that the Osireion was absolutely intended for people to go inside, very different than the pyramids themselves.
I totally agree with both aspects of this point. Yes, it was. This one was definitely designed for people to go inside, and the Great Pyramid was not originally designed for people to go inside, but later on it was reused for people to go inside. But hey, that's a whole different story. So let's just keep going.
Next up, some fantastic renderings produced by Keith Hamilton that show the configuration and the geology of the construction, so you can really see what the Osireion may have looked like in its original condition. And in this one particularly, you can see the water-filled moat surrounding the central island here, with the stairs leading down into the water. And here, showing the stairs, again, leading into the water, and the depth of the 2 vertical shafts leading down to the subterranean aquifer and water table below the structure. And the last one from Keith Hamilton, showing a beautiful and complete representation of the original structure, with the roofing beams that once covered this having been removed.
You're probably saying by this point, we've already covered this ground in other clips that we've seen. Well, yes, you are right, but I am doing it this way because the description that he gives is very important to the theory that he then puts forward. So it's so important to have the whole picture in one go. So that is why I included that clip also. I know it's nothing new. I should point out that some of these clips are not in the original order, but they are in the order necessary just to briefly give you the full perspective of his theory. So let's get him to explain it now and walk us through how he believes the Osireion was utilized.
I will be your conductor as I escort you along the same path as so many initiates that have come before you, as we descend into the subterranean underworld, which has been symbolically recreated within the Osireion. to represent the abode of Osiris and the realm of creation. So as the candidate began the ritual, he was escorted through the long entrance tunnel here in complete darkness.
I'm not sure about the complete darkness thing in the tunnels, but I'm going to go along with it. But when it comes to the Osireion itself, it would not have been in complete darkness. And I have a good reason for that. But there would at least be an opening to the sky in the middle. So we'll come back to that in the final episode. But in the meantime, let's continue with the story of the initiate.
As the red granite pillars and beams within this structure interacted with the electric fields coursing through these dielectric materials to produce profound ultrasonic vibrations within the chamber, eliciting not only a mental, but physical and biological transformation within the candidate.
I completely agree with everything so far in this perspective.
So as he stood here on the threshold of the inner sanctum, it was revealed to the candidate that no one could cross onto the central primordial mound without undergoing a ritual of purification by water, known in the ancient times as lustration, and only those who had been submerged and cleansed in the primordial waters could proceed through the rest of the initiation ritual.
All good so far. I don't have any objections. I can't say whether he's correct or not, but all makes good sense to me.
There is absolutely no way to cross onto the central island without first being submerged into the very special water source upon which this temple was constructed.
Okay then, please continue.
So the initiate would then plunge into the water off of this ledge here, fully immersing himself in the transformative waters that filled the inner reservoir. And after this ritual purification, he could then ascend the stairway onto the central island, where the remaining ritual of death and resurrection of Osiris was then conferred. And this central island is surrounded by 17 individual cells, which I propose were also intended for illumination of the temple and acoustic amplification.
It may certainly have served that purpose, those little niches, when the dynastic Egyptians were using it for initiation purposes. But I believe there was a lot more to those little tiny rooms, and I will explain in the last episode.
So this entire central structure would have been completely darkened.
So far, this is the only bit that I actually disagree with him on. It would not have been in total darkness,
but surrounded by glowing lights and reverberating sound, recreating the primordial sound of creation, the voice of God, moving through the celestial realm. This would have been a truly mind-altering and life-changing experience.
He then goes on to explain some of the pertinent numbers and a description of what it was like in the dark. So we won't actually go into that, but I do recommend you go to his channel because everything is really good that he does. I know you hear me say this a lot, but it's true. He's thought things through so well. I really can't fault his thought processes. So let's move on to what happens to the initiate next.
The candidate would then receive the rite of symbolic death and resurrection on the 17th day, most likely in a sarcophagus that was housed here in the central recess.
Of course, it is possible that the dynastic Egyptians put in a symbolic sarcophagus into this particular slot for whatever purpose that they had. But these two slots, from my perspective, had very different purposes before the dynastic Egyptians started to use it for initiation purposes.
And just imagine what this would have been like to participate in this ancient ritual of purification by water, death, and rebirth within one of the most magnificent ancient structures that was ever constructed in Egypt. The chamber itself, permeated with electric fields and echoing, reverberating ultrasound, initiating a biochemical transformation within the candidate that affected not only his consciousness, but also his physical body. And yes, not all of these structures were created for manufacturing industrial scale chemicals like ammonia or sulfuric acid, but they were all intended to produce alchemical transformations. In this case, the biochemical ascension of the candidate being initiated into the mystery school or cult of Osiris.
Well, I have no issue with what he said. I don't believe that it was complete darkness, but the rest, I think he's got a good case there, and I think that the dynastic Egyptians may well have used it for these purposes because of the amazing properties that this location would have had.
So this subterranean temple at the Osireion was capped with a dome-like structure. And I would propose that this originally featured an obelisk structure at the top.
Here's where we differ in perspective. Because I believe that there was an opening to the sky, I also believe that the obelisk, which I do agree there was an obelisk, would have come from within the structure and gone up and out. Very tall obelisk through the opening and at the top and out into the open area, and it could probably be seen for a long way away sticking up. He goes on to describe the properties of water pertinent to this site, but we won't get into that right now.
That was designed to represent the abode of Osiris, the primordial mound and waters from which all creation arose, in which the initiatory ritual of purification, death, and resurrection was conferred on candidates, being initiated into the ancient mystery school or cult of Osiris.
Do go to his channel and check out this stuff. It is fascinating. So we're on the final stretch looking at the independent researchers. Well, almost the final stretch. I have found a few little channels that I would like to just make a few comments about, but I'll do that in the next episode. But we've really covered all the big players in this field. And that would be very, very negligent of me not to have included Jimmy of Bright Insight. So here we go, and he makes some really interesting points.
Abydos, Egypt, approximately 340 miles south of the Great Pyramid of Giza, is just another example of a prehistoric civilization. Because make no mistake, the people living in Egypt a few thousand years ago, also known as the ancient Egyptians, could not have constructed this site.
One of the things I really like about Jimmy's channel is that he gets to the point. He doesn't beat about the bush. He just gets straight in and says what he thinks.
And as you can see here, here's a layout or a map of the site, which of course is referred to as a temple. Isn't it funny how everything from ancient times is always a temple?
That is a great point. I've thought that myself, but I've never actually said it.
There's different artist renditions of what it may have looked like before it deteriorated or fell apart or was destroyed. You can see that there's some sort of oval, arch-type, circular structure to the roofing system. You can see some evidence here in this black and white photo.
Now, that's interesting. Nobody else has pointed that out before, even though we've seen similar diagrams.
But one of the truly amazing things about it is the size and the weight of these granite blocks. And you can compare here as you see these other pillars next to comparison of the door. And this is a normal-sized door. So when you look at these photos, you don't realize that many of these pillars are 8 feet by 8 feet by 12 feet in height. But what makes it even more interesting is how they lifted them into place. As you can see here, they had interlocking wedges as they stacked them on top of each other. And upon a closer look, this roofing system was double layered, which is incredible considering just how massive these blocks are.
Another very good point that we haven't seen from the other independent researchers.
Look at these various cut marks and how they closely resemble, as you now see here, from Cusco, Peru. But it goes even further than that. Look at these various knob marks that you find from Cusco to Egypt, as well as up in Machu Picchu, which is very, very similar, as you can see from these knob marks, located right here at the Osireion.
This comparison has also been given by other independent researchers, but that was very succinct, so I thought I would include it. And Jimmy gives his opinion in a nutshell.
To suggest that this is a temple for praying, and to create a roofing system like this, and these pillars that are as big as they are, I think there's more to this story.
So that's the end of another episode, and it's also the last of the big independent researchers. And so in the next episode, I'll be just filling in a few more gaps before I move on to my grand finale.